It's October 2016, and Raymond Gilmour has passed away. He died alone in a flat in Kent, England, and it may have been up to 4 weeks before anybody knew he had passed. It was reported that he was an alcoholic with serious psychological issues. It was a lonely death, disowned by his friends and family, and unable to ever return to his hometown of Derry. This is the price that was paid by those who chose to become informers and inform upon their own. Raymond saw himself as a hero. He believed that he saved countless lives and brought the INLA and Provisional IRA in Derry to their knees. In this episode, we will learn about who Raymond Gilmour was and why he could never return to Northern Ireland. This is the Troubles Podcast, a podcast about the violence and bloodshed that occurred in Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and Great Britain, as multiple sides and organisations waged a bloody conflict over the status of Northern Ireland. Raymond Gilmour was born in 1959 in the Cregan in Derry. He was the youngest of 13, born into a working-class Catholic family. As the Troubles began in the late 60s, Derry became a focal point for protesting and violence. Initially, the violence broke out in the Bogside part of the city, but this gradually spread out as far as the Cregan. Between 1969 and 1972, there was a large official IRA presence in the Cregan, and as the violence escalated, the Bogside and the Cregan essentially became no-go areas for the British Army, due to their significant Republican paramilitary presence. Raymond and his siblings grew up in the middle of all this violence. His cousin, 17-year-old Hugh Gilmour, was killed on Bloody Sunday in 1972. Hugh was shot in the back as he was running away from soldiers, unarmed. Inside Raymond's home, his father Patrick was what you would call an armchair supporter of the IRA, whereas his mother completely opposed violence. 2 of his brothers had been kneecapped by the Provisional IRA for antisocial behaviour. Kneecapping involved being shot in the back of the knee out through your kneecap, causing you to walk with a limp for the rest of your life. At the age of 13, Raymond was beaten up by a British soldier, who tried to recruit him as an informer. Then, at 16, he was arrested and charged with armed robbery. Inside Crumlin Road prison in Belfast, he was attacked by members of the Provisional IRA. It's believed that it was around this time he decided to become an informer, working for the RUC's special branch, as well as the British MI5. A number of months after leaving prison, Raymond joined the Republican paramilitary group, the INLA. Just a heads up that many of the sources for this episode come from Raymond's own accounts, so there is a chance that some of the facts may be embellished. Here's Raymond talking about that time.
I was a 16, 17-year-old boy when I was approached by a special branch of the RUC, which is the police force in Northern Ireland, the sort of business, the intelligence side of it, and MI5, and was requested to join, just along a number of organisations. One was the INLA, Irish National Liberation Army, which I did, and I brought that organisation, terrorist organisation, to the knees.
While a member of the INLA, he took part in an attempted carjacking, and his friend, 17-year-old Colm McNutt, was shot dead by an undercover officer. McNutt's brother, Martin, believes that Raymond set his brother up by informing on the carjacking. Raymond left the INLA in 1978 after he was instructed to by his handlers. It was around this time he got married to Lorraine, and they had 2 children, Raymond and Denise. He was then approached again by his handler, requesting that he joined the Provisional IRA.
But I was approached again by my handler, or my partner as I would call him, and he said that we needed me to get into the Provisional IRA because they were becoming very strong in the area I lived, which is London, Derry, and trying it sort of to save lives, basically, and sort of find bombs, stop shootings and murders, basically, which I eventually did, and I brought the Provisional IRA to their knees.
He would be paid £200 a week and then given bonuses if his information led to arrests or weapons finds. Raymond didn't have a bank account, so his handler had a secret account for him where he was depositing the money. I've talked about this before, but being an informer in Northern Ireland was one of the most dangerous roles which one could take on. And one source that I came across during my research for this episode said that the Provisional IRA has killed upwards of 68 alleged informers. The IRA vetted Raymond for many months, and then he became a member in late 1980. He was attached to an active service unit in Derry, and his primary role was that of getaway driver. The vast majority of these attacks were sniping attacks from a distance, but Raymond was involved in one attack which led to the death of a British soldier. Then, in November 1981, Raymond was arrested by the RUC, as the men were on their way to carry out a shooting. He was first sent to Crumlin Road Prison before being transferred to the Maze Prison. His handlers then applied pressure to have him released, and he was released 5 months later, in April 1982. Then in August 1982, things came to a head. Raymond had informed his handler that the Provisional IRA had acquired an M60 machine gun. These were serious weapons, which could take down helicopters. And his handlers made the decision that the recovery of the weapon was more valuable than Raymond as an asset. So they decided to burn him as an informer. They were also ready to start making arrests based on his information. By this stage, Raymond's wife and children had no idea that he was an informer, and once he was burned, they would all have to disappear. Raymond had told his wife and children that they were due to go on holidays, so the family packed their bags and got into the car, and after a while, Raymond pulled over and explained to Denise that he was actually an informer and that they were never returning home. He gave her the option of remaining in Northern Ireland with their children, but after a few hours talking about it, she agreed to come with him into protective custody. In his own words, quote, "I said she had two choices, to come with me to safety in a military barracks or to go home. She burst into tears. Eventually she said she would come with me, but I saw the hatred in her eyes." A few hours after the family left the house, a truck pulled up and loaded their furniture into it before disappearing off into the night. The family spent some time on a military barracks in Northern Ireland before being relocated to Ipswich in England. They weren't happy there, and Raymond believed that his minders saw him as a common criminal and not as a fellow agent. They were then sent on a holiday to Cyprus. His wife, Lorraine, continued to ring her family back home in Northern Ireland, which led to their location being leaked to the Provisional IRA. And it's believed that a Palestinian Liberation Front hit squad, working with an IRA member, located Raymond, so the family had to flee Cyprus. By this stage, Raymond's mental health was in a very poor state, and he attempted suicide while in Cyprus. It's hard to know exactly when it happened, but it appears that his wife Lorraine had enough and wanted to go home. She left him within a year and took the children with her. Raymond would never see any of them again. Upon returning to Northern Ireland, Lorraine was attacked by the wife of a Republican prisoner. But Martin McGuinness made sure to dissuade anyone from attacking Lorraine or the children, as they were an emotional link to Raymond, which could be used to sway him during the trial. By this stage, Martin McGuinness was an elected Sinn Féin official, and though he claimed he withdrew from the IRA in 1974, it appears that he was Chief of Staff of the Provisional IRA from 1979 onwards. We'll get back to him later. In the immediate aftermath of Raymond's disappearance, the arrests began. Around 100 alleged members of both the Provisional IRA and the INLA were scooped up. all solely on the basis of Raymond's testimonies. Of this figure, 39 were charged with terrorism-related offences. This brings us to the Supergrass trials. A grass is a British slang term for someone who provides evidence in exchange for protection and prosecution from immunity. A supergrass is when one person's testimony leads to the arrest of a large number of individuals. There were a number of different supergrasses during the Troubles, both on the nationalist and unionist sides. But overall, the practice seemed controversial. And though many convictions were secured, in many cases they were overturned a couple of years later. In many cases in supergrass trials, the only evidence in existence were the words said by the supergrass. And it was difficult to trust them. They could potentially lie to protect themselves or incriminate others, or they would be financially motivated to inform on as many people as possible. The supergrass system was eventually discontinued in 1985. Today we're going to focus on Raymond and his trial. Raymond and his family disappeared in August 1982, and upon realising that one of their own was an informer and had evidence against scores of their members, the Provisional IRA took action and kidnapped Raymond's father, Patrick, in November.
Republican anger at Raymond Gilmour is plain to see on the walls around the estate where his parents live. His 61-year-old father was at home with his wife and one of his 11 children when 3 masked men went in and kidnapped him. Mrs. Gilmour was in the kitchen making a meal. She never finished it. It was left on the cooker. 2 of her daughters, one of them present when it happened, say their father was taken because of their brother. He was arrested 4 months ago and has been giving evidence against his former associates ever since.
Republicans hoped that by keeping Patrick hostage, it would prevent Raymond from testifying against paramilitaries. But this would not deter him. The trial began in July 1983, and in the months leading up to the trial, none of Raymond's family had seen him or known his whereabouts. Though I did see one source saying that he called his mother in the middle of a mental health crisis in Cyprus. Most of the following account is from an article titled "The Accusing Finger of Raymond Gilmour," written by Irish journalist Nell McCafferty, and is a detailed look into the court case, where it would appear that the Provisional IRA were using Raymond's mother to try and exert pressure on him in the courtroom. McCafferty sets the scene as Raymond and 2 others are brought into the witness box in the courtroom, facing off against 28 alleged paramilitary members in the dock, with their families packing the benches behind them. In McCafferty's own words, quote, "Raymond Gilmour did not look like Raymond Gilmour. As lately as 12 months ago, he looked just like the prisoners in the dock, the young men and women from the Bogside and the Cregan, among whom he had grown up. The men in the dock looked like part of a working class crowd, in t-shirts and plain sweaters and plain haircuts, with plain faces or a ruddy complexion. The odd tattoo on a forearm and jeans and scuffed shoes, which were occasionally visible when they leaned back in their chairs and rested a foot on the rail of the dock. Raymond Gilmour, fully visible to the press alone, was beautifully dressed in a tailored, slimline dark blue suit. His shirt was a brand new gleaming white, the striped silver and dark red tie a little too glittering perhaps. His skin was evenly tanned, the newly grown black beard trimmed neatly to his jawline. His hair was glossy, parted in the middle, but blow-dried so that it rose softly above the parting and fell gently on either side. His fingernails were manicured. He looked, as they say in Derry, a credit. He shunned looks as he sat concealed, and he did not look up into the public gallery where his mother sat, and his 3 sisters and his brother. His father was not there. He was taken into custody by the Provisional IRA after Raymond Gilmour turned informer, and no one but the IRA knows where he is. And they have said they will kill him if Raymond Gilmour does not retract his evidence. Okay, back to me. After the prosecution outlined the case, Raymond started to give evidence. McCafferty described it as a slow and gentle journey around the town of Derry. Raymond listed off the names and places, stating things along the lines of where a rifle was hidden and the people who were aware of where the gun was stashed. While this was going on, Raymond's mother had been escorted into the court by Martin McGuinness, who brought her to a seat where she could see her son, and he stayed close to her. McCafferty wrote what happened to Raymond's mother after he was finished listing off names. Quote, "She rose now as her son spoke, stepped past McGuinness, past the police, out into the aisle, down the stairs and then left to the exit door. Her son was gazing at a spot below the magistrate's bench. She was gazing at the door. Their backs were to each other. 'Raymond,' she called softly over her shoulder, but not looking over her shoulder. 'Raymond, son, you know I'm here. I can't listen any more to you saying them things about your friends.' At this moment, Raymond and his mother had exited the courtroom out of different doors. And then things escalated with the rest of the siblings. His sister then addressed the judge, saying, 'Your Honour, can my mother not speak to Raymond? She hasn't seen him for a year.' The officers were on top of her straight away and removed her from the courtroom. Quote, "The police were on top of her, grabbing her, pulling her, pushing her, and she shouted in protest, and one of them lifted her bodily off the bench and stumbled with her down the aisle. And she was pulling the policeman's hair, and his cap was falling to the ground, and her splayed body was horizontally blocking the doorway. But reinforcements pushed and shoved and punched her through, with great noise." The second sister was by now on her feet, pleading that her younger sister be left alone. The plea turning into shouted fear and anger, and even as she shouted, the RUC were mounting towards, descending on her, coming at her from both sides, pushing and punching. Not able to grab her whole body because she was in the middle of the row, with friends on either side. But for one long, dreadful moment, her arms were tugged out on either side of her, like a crucifixion without a cross or nails. And then she was pulled head first over the benches and down, over the head of the third sister, who had risen to her feet too, and was trying to stop the passage of her sister's body above her, but she was also grabbed and the two were beaten in a melee of green uniforms out the door. John Gilmour, eldest boy in the family, had meanwhile risen to his feet, away up near the back. His mouth was wide open, but no sound came from it. His fists were clenched to his side. His whole frame was still and taut and straining, but he said nothing and did not move. Because if he moved or spoke, even as they bet his three sisters, he would be removed from the court, and there would be no family member present to recall Raymond, however silently, back to his home. The court was suddenly silent again, and the sisters gone, but he was still on his feet, agony in his features. The RUC gathered below him. "What are you looking at?" "I'm not doing anything. I'm not saying anything," he said, trembling visibly from the strain of doing and saying nothing. The policemen looked, and some took a step toward him, because he was not seated, as one should be seated in an orderly courtroom. And then they halted, as we all, magistrate, press, defendants, relatives, special branch, prison guards, gazed upon this spectacle. John Gilmour looks like a man at bay, a rabbit in the headlights, both these things. Then the door swung open again and the yells and screams of his sisters and knockabout noises came from the passageway beyond. There issued then from his mouth a sound that bore no resemblance to the spoken word. It was a loud, long bellow, and as it came forth he launched himself headlong into the serum of police below. They caught him and passed him over to the aisle, but he regained his feet there and stood bursting against them, resisting the downward pull. And there were 7 policemen draped anyhow about his person, 2 on their knees clasping his knees, 2 around his waist, 2 on his arms, and 1 behind him pulling his neck back in a forearm lock. They tumbled, punched each other down the stairs and out the door. all the Gilmours were gone. I don't know much about Nell McCafferty, but I really enjoyed how visually she described that scene. After the kerfuffle ended, Raymond was brought back into the courtroom and continued naming names and incidents. He started talking about a bomb plot at a British Army lookout post, where they planted a bomb which didn't go off. Raymond was then asked to identify the members who had taken part in the operation. Some of the members were sitting in the docks, and if these people were convicted based off what Raymond was saying, they could serve significant jail sentences. Back to McCafferty talking about Raymond identifying those accused in the courtroom. Quote, "He would have to point them out, of course. Point his finger at them. That man there," he said conversationally, pointing. "The man on the left with the yellow t-shirt. That girl there, sitting in the second row, between the policemen." Others he could not spot so easily, for they were in the second row of the dock, behind the first crowded row. One man would not wait to be pointed out. He got to his feet. "Is it me you're looking for, Gilmour?" "Yes, that's you," Raymond Gilmour replied, and then he had moved on to the next, and the next, and next. A further name was mentioned, and as his expressionless gaze travelled their faces slowly from far left to middle, the named man on the far right was already on his feet, himself pointing at Gilmour. Gilmour's glance arrived at him finally, and he too pointed, so that they were pointing at each other, but the named man stayed accusingly silent, and Gilmour had to say his name. And then there was the young man he could not find at all. Back and forth he looked, peering, craning his neck, then back and forth again. Finally he smiled, as in fond remembrance of a joke. "Of course, there you are," he almost thought aloud. And some of the prisoners turned smiles on the man he had finally located, because this man was quite small, and you wouldn't hardly see him in a crowd. And his size was the butt of fond jokes. The communal link snapped suddenly as another prisoner rose to his feet and snarled in fury, "Gilmour, you yellow bastard," and the prison guards were onto him. But he had turned already to go down to the cell below, because he knew the procedure once composure snapped. "I hope your dad gets stiffed," he yelled. And this time the prison guards pushed him. A clatter of feet, a muffled call, and the waters closed again. And Raymond Gilmour continued to point at people. Outside of the courtroom, Raymond's mother and siblings apologised to anyone who would listen, with Raymond's mother saying she just couldn't bear it. As you can imagine, they would have been under so much stress during this time. It was in her interest to get her husband back, and it would appear that the IRA was also exerting pressure on the Gilmour family. The original plan had been for Raymond's mother to stand up as he pointed at people, and for her to say, "Raymond, can you identify me?" This was in the hopes to stop him from making further accusations. The Gilmours were in a very difficult spot. For one, the patriarch of their family was currently kidnapped by the Provisional IRA. Then, on top of that, their name was tainted. One of their own was an informer, and he was selling out his neighbours, his friends, and the people in his community. They needed to disown him to try and avoid this stain. But if they disowned him, they may lose any hope to persuade him to stop informing. But was it working? Was Raymond breaking? It didn't appear so. McCafferty wrote that in the initial stages of Patrick Gilmour being kidnapped, there was a jovial tone around it, that he was having a laugh with the lads over in Donegal. But this changed as some relatives of Republican prisoners called for him to be shot. But this would be pointless. Quote, "If Mr. Gilmour is shot now, the reasoning goes, it will only stiffen Raymond's resolve. There's no point in shooting him after the trial either, since the damage will have been done. There is a point, though, to shooting him dead anyway, as a warning to other informers. Unless the Gilmour family can draw Raymond back from the brink, the Gilmour family, isolated, draw emotional sustenance from Sinn Féin because few others will speak to them and live in dread of what the Provisional IRA will do. Coming to the defence of somebody who's an informer is a very difficult thing to do. Raymond argued that he saved countless lives because of the information that he was passing on to the security services. But despite this, groups that would advocate for non-violence during the Troubles, such as the Catholic Church and SDLP, did not step in and show him any support. This trial, or rather a subsequent trial based on this one, eventually collapsed after the judiciary would not endorse convictions based on just one witness. Raymond argued that nobody else would come forward and be witnesses as a result of intimidation from the Provisional IRA. Despite this, many of the accused spent around 2 years behind bars. Raymond explains.
I think at the time was over sort of almost 100 sort of members of the INLA and the IRA, and but that was dwindled down to about 30 people at the end. Because of security issues and there wasn't enough evidence and all that to sort of get prosecutions against them, basically. But they were taken off the streets, most of them for almost 2 or 3 years. And while they were off the streets, the terrorists from the IRA, that was the quietest period of time for bombings and shootings and murders and no murders taking place, basically, in the whole of sort of the time in Londonderry. But that's 2 or 3 years, so that in itself speaks volumes.
In the end, the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Lowry, acquitted all of the defendants, telling Gilmour, quote, "You are a selfish and self-regarding man, to whose lips a lie invariably comes more naturally than the truth." He went on to describe Gilmour as a man who was oblivious to every natural inclination and obligation, who cared nothing about bonds of kinship or friendship, and he had no idea how he came to become an informant. Raymond's father Patrick was eventually released in December 1983. In the wake of the trial, graffiti started to appear around Derry, threatening Gilmour. One I came across during my research said, quote, "I knew Gilmour. Thank fuck he didn't know me." So what became of Raymond Gilmour after the trial? Well, he disappeared into England and never saw his wife or children again. In England, he was married a number of times, but it appears that his marriages broke down due to his many mental health issues and alcoholism. And though he lived under a new identity in England for 30 years, Northern Ireland was never far from his mind. And though peace came and the violence eventually stopped, Raymond could never come home. Here he is talking about the death of his parents.
I've been away for almost over 30 years now, and the security service MI5, Special Branch, hadn't got the courtesy. I couldn't even go to my mother and father's funeral in Northern Ireland. I was rang up when my mother was almost put in the ground in her grave to say that my mother was dead, and only a journalist friend of mine in Northern Ireland let me know. And when my father died, in 1992, he requested me to go over and see him, but I was told by the security service that I wouldn't be welcome and they wouldn't provide any security for me. And, it's a case of absolutely diabolical. Everybody wants to see their parents at the end of the day, and I've done my best, and I was totally committed to the work that I had done for the security services, and I saved many, many, many lives. I've saved many millions of pounds in damage, loss of damage for the security services, and at the end of the day, we and there's a few people like myself that time were being thrown to the wolves.
In 2007, Raymond appeared on British media, making a public request to be able to safely return to Northern Ireland to visit family. He said he was suffering from a heart ailment and was an alcoholic. This request was met with a cautious response from Martin McGuinness. He said that the IRA posed no threat, but that Gilmour should consider for himself whether it was safe to return. And after Raymond's public plea, more graffiti was seen around Derry threatening him. His request was also coming just 1 year after ex-informant Dennis Donaldson was shot dead in the Irish county of Donegal, with the real IRA claiming responsibility for this killing. There was little to no possibility of peace and reconciliation between Republicans and informers, and Raymond got the message and remained in the UK. There were some who supported him, such as Unionist MPs in Northern Ireland. Here's DUP councillor Ian Paisley Jr. speaking about informers. Quote, "An agent, that's who we're talking about, who worked for the government in the dirtiest war ever this side of Kosovo, should be protected and given his contractual obligations." Over the subsequent years, Raymond would offer crumbs to the Northern Irish police force, once saying that he would tell them the name of the man who had killed census worker Joanne Mathers. This was a killing which shocked the already hardened people of Derry. She was a young mother going door to door collecting information for the census when she was killed. Raymond continued to publicly fight for what he felt he was owed, which was, according to this BBC News article, quote, he was promised £500,000, a new home, psychiatric support and a pension by MI5, but was provided with modest accommodation and £600 a month for 3 years, and was not given employment. Mr. Gilmour said his false identity did not stand up to scrutiny. He suffered alcoholism and post-traumatic stress disorder because of his work and was left destitute. In the UK, Raymond launched a claim to try and recover some of this money, but a tribunal rejected it. Martin McGartland is another informer who infiltrated the Provisional IRA in 1989 and passed information on to Special Branch. He has his own story, which I will eventually tell, and is currently living in the UK under a new identity. He has continued to advocate for himself and other ex-informants, saying that the UK government should look after those who helped them during the Troubles. Martin was a close friend of Raymond and was very critical of the British government and how they treated Raymond, saying, quote, "Ray was living on peanuts when I met him. At times, I had to put money into his bank account. Ray was very hard work. I've my own problems and dealing with him was just too much. During phone conversations, he would threaten to take his own life. He wasn't getting the treatment he needed for his psychological problems. He was referred to his local NHS, but they wrote to Andrew Parker, the head of MI5, saying that they couldn't deal with such big issues from Ray's Northern Ireland days. I also asked MI5 to help him many times, but got nowhere." The final years of Raymond's life were spent trying to get money, mental health services, and in a sense, recognition for his work as an informer. But it really doesn't sound like it was a happy life. The Belfast Telegraph reports that he sometimes spent the night in the local prison after starting fights with local men, and he would often spend weeks at a time drinking alone in his flat. Raymond was found dead in his home in October 27, 2016. His 18-year-old son, from another marriage, made the grisly discovery. Raymond had died weeks before and was badly decomposed, with his family thinking he had been on another bender or that he'd gone to ground and was talking to the PSNI. It's unclear exactly how he died, and I'm not sure if the toxicology report was ever released publicly. McGartland spoke of the day Raymond's body was found, quote, "Ray was unrecognisable. His son rang 999 and the paramedics who arrived wouldn't let other relatives see Ray because they said it would be too disturbing. They also advised against seeing him in the morgue. On a good day, he was a lovely bloke with a heart of gold, but things took their toll on him. He wasn't as resilient as I am in dealing with problems. I hope his death is a wake-up call to the security services to start treating their former agents as human beings." A small private family service was held for Raymond in Kent, where he was then buried, with his name left off the tombstone to prevent people damaging it. Raymond never met his original family ever again, though he did find out some details about their lives only after he was reunited with his sister Geraldine in 2010. She told him that he was a grandfather and that his daughter Denise had twins. In Raymond's own words, quote, "I will love them until the day I die." This is a sentiment which is not echoed by his first son. Raymond Jr. was interviewed shortly after his father's death. He hadn't seen his father in 33 years, since the day Lorraine took them back to Derry. Upon hearing the news, he made a post on social media saying, quote, "Today is a very good day. A lot of demons finally put to rest. There is a God." He said he never knew his father and never wanted to know him, saying that he wasn't a nice man and became a supergrass purely for the sake of money. He also remarked that Raymond didn't deserve the ink used in the media reports about his death. This brings us to the end of the story of Raymond Gilmour. Was he a man with lofty aspirations, whose goal was to save the lives of innocents? Or was he someone who just wanted to line his pockets with money paid to him by British security services? I even came across one source asking the question if Raymond was brainwashed at 16 by members of the security services. But he was a man with few supporters, who Republicans can never forgive, and at least according to him, the British government would rather forget. 1 year before his death, Raymond released a book about his life, titled What Price Truth? And it's with the words that he wrote that I will finish this episode. Quote, "My special branch handlers assured me that, in return for informing on the terror groups, saving lives and property, and at the same time losing my family, my friends, my home, I would be given financial support for the rest of my life, including a lump sum payment, in order that I could settle somewhere, away from the reach of the tentacles of Martin McGuinness's IRA. That promise has been broken. I am a broken individual. I went through hell for my country, and now I am alone and penniless. I've gone through 4 marriages and have no hope of returning safely to Derry to see my family again. This book is my story. I will never set foot on Irish soil again. I am alone. Such is the price of truth." That's it from me. Thanks, and see you next time.